Wonderful that you mentioned Cathy McGowan too, because she is going to be our next speaker, Order of Australia no less, elected as the first woman independent MP to federal parliament in 2018. She is passionate about community, about people, about land. She's an advocate for rural, regional and remote Australia. She's got such a long history involved with land care. She was the inaugural secretary and later president of her local Indigo Valley Land Care Group in northeastern Victoria in the early 90s and was recently nominated as a land care champion. And it was for her work with communities, and particularly women in agriculture in Australia, PNG and Ireland, for which she was awarded the Order of Australia. And she's just great. So will you please make her very welcome?
Minister, thank you for those inspiring words. Delegates, it's wonderful to be here. Conference organisers, I too join in acknowledging the traditional owners and the history of this country that goes back a very long way. And I would like to say, hasn't it been a fascinating and interesting conference? I'm from the east, and I totally enjoyed waking up in the night to the rain. Not enough of it, but lovely. And I absolutely, like you, understand the importance of land care. So my topic today is building community resilience in times of change. How to. And I have to say it's one of those topics that makes me think of my grandmother and sucking eggs. So I do it with a little bit of humility because there's not much I'm going to say to you that you don't already know. So as I'm talking, I hope you nod your head and go, yep, yep, yep. And then I hope you do what I'm going to ask you to do, which is enforced by the comments from Minister Kelly. How do we build community resilience in times of change? So my call to action, and I'm beginning with the end in mind, is to find your voice and use it, and to inspire others to find their voice and use it. So, is that better? So in my talk today, I'm going to talk about how I think you can find your voice and use it, and in that process, do the transformational change that we need, which I agree with the Minister is totally and utterly needed, and it's in our hands. So my 6 steps, how to build community resilience in times of change. So the number one thing you have to do clearly is start where you're at. Where are you at? So today I'm in Western Australia talking at a conference. I was here yesterday and last night I got onto all my friends at home and said, oh my word, those Western Australians are doing such good work integrating Indigenous cultural knowledge into land care. And lots of my colleagues and friends said, how are they doing it? I don't actually know how you did it, Louise, but I'm keen to know that the impact was there. I went home knowing a whole lot more than I did, and I particularly enjoyed the afternoon small group sessions, so starting where I'm at. So in starting where we're at, however, we didn't just land here. Land care has got 30 years of history, at least, and Australia's got whatever number it is in Western Australia, 60,000, 80,000, a very long history. So we've got a history, we're here now, and we've got a place we're going to. So start where you're at. The next thing I know that's really important is to agree where we want to go. Where do we want to go? Which is a bit like what you're saying, is if we don't set the agenda, someone else will do it. So where do we want to go with land care, with global warming? Where do we want to go with this wonderful nation of ours? And I agree with you totally, Minister. It's me, it's my family, it's my community, it's my LGA, it's my region, NRM region, it's my state, and it's this Commonwealth of ours. And I would say if there's a point about this whole talk that I'm going to make is this lack of clarity around vision and agreement about where we want to go that provides us with our greatest opportunity, which I'll talk a little bit about. The third step along the way is to document our stories. And I really enjoyed, as Dimitri, going to the exhibitions yesterday and picking up the Landcare, State of Landcare survey, and then the other one was the report on 2017, the documentation that's gone with it. So I acknowledge the work that's gone into it and say how useful I've found that. But I also know that we're not really good, and we've got a long way to go, in documenting our stories in popular culture. So over in northeast Victoria, where I'm from, we've just had huge success with painted silos. Has that movement come to WA? So how many of the local Landcare groups have used your painted silos as a banner or a billboard for Landcare? So I wanted to put that out there. The other thing I wanted to talk about was TV programs, locally produced TV programs around Landcare, drama, it's in every one of our groups. Romance, it's in every one of our groups. And hearing what I heard yesterday, the stories of the Aboriginal culture, and seeing that picture up there of those grandmothers and those daughters, oh my God, isn't there a story there? So films, of course, and our heroes. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I want to also say one of the really important things on this journey is being open to diversity of vehicles and companions. So when Landcare started, it was land and mostly farmers. And some of the interesting companions we've picked up along the way are urban Landcare, coast care, and some other really unlikely companions on the way who have taken us to different places perhaps than a group of farmers might ever have gone. So being open to that is really important. And I, again, heard lots of examples of that yesterday. Number 5 on the list is check your course. Clearly, you know about that. But there's a lovely story of a group of engineers who are building a road through a jungle. You might have heard this one. So engineers like straight roads, so that was fine. They were building a straight road. And someone, a young bloke, said, I don't know about this road. I better just climb a high tree and just check where we're going. So he scaled up the tree and the engineers were saying, how is it? How wonderful is our road? And the young bloke called down, it's a fantastic road, wrong place. Oh. So I just can't estimate enough how you can get really busy building a straight road going where you think you're going to go and not checking out, is it actually taking you? Are you doing a whole lot of busy work? Or actually, are you on track to go where you want to go? And then finally, the celebration of your arrival. Now, clearly, you don't need any help with that one. So I'm just going to stop for a few minutes because in that 6 stuff, those 6 steps, I know you know that. So I'm wondering if you could pick out one of those and just talk to somebody around you for 2 minutes about how you, in your work, do one of those. Introduce yourself, where you're from, and I'll give you a call in 2 minutes. So have a quick chat. How do you do that? Okay. No, they'll come back. Okay, thank you. Now, I want you to hold that in your mind, that conversation, because we'll be coming back to it a little bit later. So the next bit of my talk is, as the whole theme is finding your voice and using it and getting others to find your voice and using it as one of the ways that we can build resilience and manage change. So what I want to do now is make my disclaimer that I am going to make a political speech. It's not a party political speech, but exactly as the Minister said, I'm here today with a very, very clear purpose in mind. I want you to find your voices collectively and use them, and to go home and help others find their collective voices and use them. Because I think we're on a journey and we've got a long history, and I think we've got a whole lot of work to do if we are going to make Australia the country we want it to be into the future. So what I want to do now for the bulk of my talk is share with you some stories. I want to talk to you about something I've learned about communities. I want to talk a little bit about what I've learned about politics, and I want to talk something about what I've learned about Australia. And then I'm going to move into the call to action, which is basically, what are you going to do? Because you know how to do all this, but how do we actually take it forward? So it's probably about 20 minutes of talking from me. And as I'm doing it, I'm wanting you to actually run your own story through your head. Like, I'm telling you my story, but clearly you've all got similar ones. So I want to start with my story of connection with community and Landcare and sort of how I got here. And then I want to talk a little bit about my story of Australia and Landcare. And then I want to talk very specifically about politics and how I know politics can help us do what we need to do. So let me talk a little bit now about community and my reflections on my where I started and my journey there. So I was born on a farm, and it wasn't long, I was very young when I discovered that I actually had dirt in my veins, that I was really interested in agriculture and farming and growing things, particularly animals is what I love. But in those days it wasn't a thing a girl did, so I went off and became a teacher, which was fine. And I used the money that I earned in teaching to buy a farm, a small farm. Now, that was all fine, coming home to the valley where I'd grown up, but I didn't know much really about farming, and I didn't know much, I mean, even though I'd grown up in a community, I didn't have any knowledge about how to work in that community. And I can remember getting really frustrated with the old blokes, the Traditional Farmers Federation, the lack of change, and just really annoyed at a young age that things weren't as I wanted. But I was blessed, I suppose, that my father had lived in that valley and farmed in that valley for a long time. And he took me under his arm, so to speak, and said, well, Kathy, you can complain all you like, but really you've got to put your hand up and turn up. And one of those very early lessons in life is that the future belongs to those who turn up. So turn up I did with Dad to the Victorian Farmers Federation meetings, terrible, to fire brigade meetings, horrible, to anything at all, but I would go. And then in the late 1980s, one of the Victorian ministers, a bit like Minister Kelly, a woman called Kay Setcher, came to our community, and she was spruiking Landcare. So the VFF said, OK, we're going to get there and make her welcome. So I was in my early 30s and went to this meeting and met Carolyn Setchers, and through her, Joan Kerner, whom I'm going to talk about later. But all of us were there, thought, gosh, that's a really good idea. It's not like Fire Brigade, and it's not like the Victorian Farmers Federation. It's actually about something we like. And we particularly liked the name, Landcare. That worked for us. So part of that story was we had our first community meeting in our little Indigo primary school, one teacher's school, tiny little seats that none of us fitted on. And it was one of those horrible community meetings where no one wanted any jobs because we all knew it would be work. And until the day I die, I remember that experience of the dead silence, when who wanted to be president, who wanted to be... no one did. And we hadn't organised it because no one had got organised. Anyhow, it eventually got sorted after a lot of protracted community negotiation of no one talking to anybody. And I got the job of being the communications person because I had a computer, the only one in the valley, mind you, one of those little Apple computers.
Who were you going to send emails to?
No, we didn't have emails. It was typing. No, we didn't have emails. So that was all good. So in that journey of setting up the Indigo Valley Landcare Group in 1989, now let me just check, anyone else was around actual Landcare groups then? I know there were bird groups and tree groups, but there's a few of us, great. So you know this story. So you'll be running your own story through your head. So that was all good. Eventually I moved through the ranks and I became president of the Landcare Group. We did wonderful things like creek walks, weed control. We did a history of settlement in the Indigo Valley. We did butcher's paper around, and we did sort of a wall chart of history of everything people knew from the beginning of time through. And we did a lot of socialising and mixing, as you did. But one of the things I was always interested in was research, and at that time in Victoria there was a lot of women presidents of our particular network. So with Charles Sturt University, we did it, me and another researcher, Penny Davis, did a paper, Women's Involvement in Landcare in North East Victoria, so documenting. And that paper was the first of its kind, looking at a gender lens in Landcare, even though it was interesting, it hadn't been documented. And as a result of that paper, Penny put it up for presentation at an international conference. So in 1994, we got invited, Penny and I, to go to a conference in Moscow. on women's participation in environmental change. And the conference was actually funded by American philanthropy women. And it was just the beginning of the wall had gone down in Germany and beginning of the change in Russia. And those American women wanted to invest in environmental reconciliation, I think, post-communist Russia. So that was a big deal. We went to Moscow, paid, and we presented our paper. And that was all lovely. But what really happened to me at that conference was I heard other people's stories. I heard stories of communities that were beside nuclear dumps and the work of the women in particular looking after the children who were suffering because of the associated diseases linked to. Anyhow, I came home to Australia and thought, oh my God, really? What can I do with that knowledge about how hard it is for those communities? And I came home absolutely committed to find my voice and use it, because that's what we had in Australia. We could organise community groups, we could organise non-government activity, and we could get our voices heard. And those women in particular, but the community of Russia didn't have that. They didn't have community groups, they didn't have consumer groups. They weren't allowed to do what we were able to do. So I came back with a really strong sense of the gift of grassroots community action, and particularly what I'd seen through the Landcare group. So a long story, but the transformation happened in me that I had to use my voice. Like I had heard those Russian women using their voice, but I had to take responsibility in Australia. So that's all good. I came back and I got involved in a whole lot of other activities linked to using the knowledge and the model of Landcare in lots of different ways. So I'm now going to move to the second part of my story, which is I want to talk about Australia and Landcare before I do the politics. So Landcare, I think, has played a really important part in rural and regional Australia in creating a particular type of culture. And I look back now and I see groups in rural counselling, I see farm groups with Meat and Livestock Australia, with Wool Innovation, with the dairy groups, and I see many of them using the same model of Landcare, of locally controlled groups, money in for a facilitator, and then grassroots extension. So what I wanted to just acknowledge today was the role of two women, which was Joan Kirner and Heather Mitchell. Joan Kirner was a Premier of Victoria. Heather Mitchell was President of the Victorian Farmers Federation. At a time, those two women, Labor, unlikely candidate, and Heather Mitchell, Western Victorian aristocracy, if you want, came together and they came up with the title of Landcare, of those two words together, and certainly began talking about how community groups could work. And then the next stage, I think I want to acknowledge Rick Farley and Phil Toyne. Rick Farley was the CEO of the NFF at that time, and Phil was a really good conservationist doing his work. So they took the model that had been particularly grown in Victoria, but I know other places, and then they set up a relationship with unexpected Bob Hawke. So again, another Labor Prime Minister. And then out of that relationship of the NFF and Labor, so we'd had Victorian and Labor, the Victorian Farmers Federation and Labor, we got the decade of Landcare, we got the billion trees, we got Farm Smart, and we got massive investment into it. So I'm telling you this story to remind you that we have a political history. We didn't just arrive at this space through nothing. We've had a lot of really clever people doing really good political work. They knew where they wanted to go, and they had a strategy, and they picked up unlikely companions on the way. So, put that out there, you know all that, there's nothing new to you. But what was really interesting was the development of the model. So in the next bit, it went from being a grassroots community-run, I think, fun activity to something a little bit different over the intervening years. And when I read this report, which is a 2017 report, it basically said that the Commonwealth Government-led soon became the main funder of, and initially it developed in relationship with state government, but it has declined ever since that happened. Now, don't we know that if you're home up to the tree, the engineers building the road. They're building a really straight road called, I don't know, something, but it's not going. It's not that road that's funded by NRM is not going where I want this country to go to. So coming and talking to you today, I'm climbing up the tree and I'm looking down and I'm saying, is this NRM that we're talking about taking you and my family and my community and my LGA and my region and my state and my country to the place where I want it to be? And I reckon, great jungle, wrong road. So when I talk about resilience and changing, I'm actually talking about you, me, us have got to find our voice and say, great program, but not going in the direction we want. So I want to talk a little bit more about Australia and where we want, because I think, and this is my politics again, but particularly in terms of land care and rural and regional Australia, we don't have a vision for what we want of our regions. But we've got an opportunity, and it's exactly as the Minister just said, these huge turnouts over the last fortnight ago with the climate change strikes. Like in my town of Albury-Wodonga, 1,000 young people lay down on the street outside the Minister for the Environment offices, Susan Lee, who's a member just across the border from me. They lay down on the road. It has never happened like that before. So I want to go to those young people and say, let's get some land care groups in our schools or some other equivalent. Let's actually get all that energy and somehow bring it on board with the work that we're doing, because the passion's there. But those young people, I don't think, have the vision either. They know where they are and they know where they don't want to go, but they haven't got the leadership to say, here's the country we want, here's how where your passion for the environment fits in with my love of my farm and my care of the environment and the coasts and everything else. So we've got to have the leadership voice to say, let's get, or the process, to get some agreement of where this vision is taking us. So I'm really, really interested in that, and in a few minutes I'm going to give you some time to talk about not the where, because I think the where is not the question, it's the process of having the discussion about the vision that's really important. But I don't just think it's in land care and environment that we don't have a vision. There's a whole lot of other topics that I came across when I was a Member of Parliament that really made me so sad, because the community voice is not being heard. And it's not being heard because we're not saying it. And the Minister has just said, well, go and join your party. Well, that's certainly one thing that we need to do, but there's other things that I can put to you that we need to do. But it's finding your voice and using it and getting other people to do it. So I see a nation at a point in time, and we have got an incredibly long history, 6,000s and millions of years, a long time. And we're going to be here for a really long time.
Maybe.
We will be here for a really long time. Someone will be here. But in what environment and circumstance is a bit of our visioning. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that after I've talked about the political journey. So if you're getting a sense of who I am, I'm a farmer, I live in a family community, I care about my farm, I care about my community. And in 2012, a group of my nieces and nephews who have all left, they've gone in Sydney, Melbourne, somewhere else, a group of them were in Melbourne, rang up on Saturday night and said, Kathy, we've I don't know, does it happen here? The kids get together in Perth and they share houses when they leave home? Anyhow, they do that. So the group of them, local kids, Kathy, we've all agreed, now that's always a worry, we've all agreed that you should stand to become the Member of Parliament and make the seat marginal. And it was a phone call on a Saturday night, and I think they'd had too much to drink, quite frankly. But it's when your kids and your nieces and nephews tell you that, you just don't, well, you can, but I chose not to. I said, okay, that's an interesting idea. Why don't I come to Melbourne and talk to you about it? And I said that because, you know what I was saying before about the kids and the climate change? When kids come with you with a good idea, they were using their voice to me, and I knew to listen. So I thought, oh, that's a chance to get those kids a little bit more organised about how they get their voices heard. And all of you have been in exactly the same circumstance. I know you have. Anyhow, went to Melbourne, met their friends, and I could hear their passion. And I said, well, what is it that's got you mobilised? And they basically said, Kathy, the trains don't work. We've got no mobile phone coverage. We've got no internet. There are no jobs, and also no one cares about climate change. But it was the climate change that was their real point of pressure. So after a period of time and a long, long story, we formed a committee in our community because we thought that they probably had a good point, and we thought, well, if we made our seat marginal, that was good, that could be better. So I want to talk a little bit about that process, and I'm very happy to answer some questions at the end if you want to know more, but I don't want to spend too long on it today because I really want to talk about what you do with your voice. So we worked out that where we were at was in a very conservative country seat in North East Victoria. We had a Liberal Member of Parliament who'd been there for 9 years, and it was very safe. We thought that the only way we're going to get change is if we get lots of community engagement and using those Landcare models of small groups, locally run, bit of local facilitation. Like there was no money, but we knew the model. So basically that's what we set up, and we ran what we called kitchen table conversations. So the kitchen table conversations, again, that you get the metaphor for voice. What is it about your community that you love? Was one of the questions. What is it about representation that would work for you? Not only federal representation, but what do you want your representatives to do? And the third was, what are the issues you want some action on? So over a period of, say, 5 months, there was 200 people out of 100,000 got engaged in those conversations. But it was the conversation, it's here where we are and here's where we want to go, that actually unleashed that want for something better. People loved their community, but they were frustrated and angry and cross with the representation of it. So we were able to mobilise that frustration and anger, but also the optimism, and eventually it came to pass that I put my hand up to run as an independent for that seat. Now, I ran as an independent, not because I wanted to, God help me, and not because, but for a very, very pragmatic reason. It was a Liberal Party seat. We had no one ever votes Labor in our area, and I was a local farmer, well known, so I clearly wasn't Liberal and I definitely wasn't national, so the independent label fitted for me, but it also fitted for all these people because they didn't want to be aligned with a party. So that was the independent bit, but the really funny thing was that the reason why they wanted me is because I could speak, because I could talk and I could engage. And I think it's the same for almost everyone in this room. I wasn't real good at it, but I could do it. And I was scared, but that I could get over my own fear. And they knew that if they got behind me, it could work. But our intention was never to win. Our intention was to make the seat marginal because we knew marginal seats get heard. And in fact, we did win by 439 votes. So if 200 people had done something, that's out of 100,000. And I'm just saying to you, it was not hard. It took organisation and it took skill. But once we tapped into people's sense of wanting to have a voice about their communities and wanting to be able to be heard, they got on board. And then we provided, I think, the leadership and the structure, how they could have their voice and how they could be heard. But the thing that's really surprised me about that whole process, it's all Landcare, it's all the same process that you use. You get people together, you talk about where they're at, you talk about where they want to go, you get a bit of a vehicle together, like we've got to do a Landcare walk or we've got to go and buy a spread thing, a weed sprayer or whatever it is we've got to do, and then you go and do it and then you reflect on it. And then you say, well, what did we learn and how do we do it again? So for 3 elections that happened in North East Victoria, 2013, 16, and I'm really pleased in 19 that I was able to do the succession planning. And again, a really important part of Landcare groups is you succession plan your way out of being president. Otherwise you get stuck in that job for a long time. I knew I didn't want to stay in Parliament forever. I thought 6 years is enough, and passed it on to Helen Haines, who's a PhD in public health, and she will do a superb job. So that liberates me to get on with my life and do what I want to do. So, but the community's there. The community has moved from being powerless, caught up in their anger, to a place of they know that what they do makes a difference. And when Helen ran her campaign, just in May, she had 1,700 volunteers who'd signed up to our values statement. And I want to talk a little bit about our values statement there, because when we talked about in our groups about the Australia we wanted, it's not actually a destination we want. It's a nation that does actually have shared values. And the discussion in our small groups, our kitchen table conversations, were what are the values that you want to use that underpin you as a person, your family and your community. And in the discussion about our values, we found alignment. And once we had an alignment about who we wanted to be and how we wanted to be with each other, it was much easier then to talk about what the issues were that we wanted to deal with, because it was how we dealt with the issues, not just the dealing with the issues. And that became really important to me, is the how we do things, which is what I'd learned with Landcare. So Landcare wasn't just about getting rid of the weeds. Landcare was about building the community, or as I learnt yesterday, working with the Aboriginal people to build your community. And then together you go and have a bit of fun. And Jono, you hear yesterday about the barbecue and the quality of the feed and, making it actually work. That's what I learned about Landcare. And that's what we did in our campaign, is we always had food, we always had learning, we always worked together as a group. So that's how come when Lou said, well, I come today and share the story, I just really wanted to give you that direct link between me and politics. So, I know you know that. But when I got to Parliament, I was just shocked by the lack of conversation around values in this country, really. And I got shocked by the lack of conversation, really, about the future for our land. Like, it doesn't exist. And I came to understand that if you're not there, you're not there. There's nobody else actually speaking for you if you're not speaking for yourself. True. I'm sure I thought that there would be someone in Canberra, someone in the public service who would be speaking up on the importance of programs like Landcare to build community, to solve the problems we've got, and to reap the incredible economic value of that investment. But no, they're not there. So when I'm thinking about your local representatives, down the street down here you've got Mr Ian Goodenough, member for Moore. He should be here. Because he does not know this. Ian has no idea about Landcare. So some of you in the electorates of Durack. So I think, what's her name? Melissa. She's probably got a better idea. And some of you are in O'Connor, Rick Wilson. He might have an idea. I don't know about that. But I'm sure your city ones don't have.
Oh, John Kerry. John Kerry would have an idea.
He's not federal though. So I was actually talking about federal. Nola Marino should know, but I don't think she talks about it. So it was a really funny situation. Here was I, the independent member, picking up conversations always about agriculture and Landcare. And that's what drilled home to me, is the lack of vision of, probably you don't expect the Liberal Party to have a policy on long-term sustainable communities. Maybe you expect the National Party to, but it doesn't. If you Google National Party and regional development, it's bereft. And certainly the Labor Party, maybe the Labor Party more in Western Australia, but certainly over east, they don't have the vision. So it's just not there. So I wanted to come and talk to you today about that, because how do we get back to the combination of the wisdom of Joan Kerner, Heather Mitchell, Rick Farley, Phil Hoyne? They were only people just like us, but they actually understood the journey that we're on. So now I just want to tell you another little story about vision, and I've got a few more minutes, so just indulge me. Can you put your hand up if you've been to England and checked out the great gardens of England? Oh yeah, lots. So I'm going to tell you a little story about that. So if you haven't been there, you probably heard about the aristocracy in England. They built big houses in the 1700s, 1800s, and then superb gardens around them. So when I went, I was just astounded by how beautiful they were, how well designed they were, and how old they were, in my sense. And I did a bit of research, and I discovered that in the 1600s and 1700s, there was a very popular landscape gardener called Capability Brown. And Capability Brown and his apprentices got the jobs to do most of those famous gardens that are still there. So this is 400 years ago. And I say this with great respect to my Aboriginal colleagues here, like it's nothing on your history, but just to use an example of that. So I explored what Capability Brown did, and basically what he would do was imagine the future into existence. So he would imagine the beautiful new house with its beautiful French open glass doors, and you look out too. And then he imagined you look out on water. You've always got to look out on water. And then there'd be a wetland, because the wetland was really important to encourage the birds and whatever. And then at either side of the view, the landscape, there would be oak forests. And he designed it in his mind that the oak forest, the view would come, sort of start out low, then go up for the big oak forests, and then come down in the middle to the water, and then go up again with the oak, and then go down again. Now, I'm giving you just a summary of the whole thing. But I was just amazed. I thought, oh my God, this bloke designed landscapes. He designed landscapes not for now, but for 200 years away when those oak trees are really tall. That was interesting. And then I was talking about it, and someone said, but have you seen his landscaping plans for the gardeners? And I said, no, show me. So they did. It was a layout, sort of an early gridded map. And just for example, with the oak trees, the instructions for the gardeners were that first off, you plant the oak trees very close together to make them grow tall, and then over a period of time you thin them out. But you thin them out so that the ones on the downhill side go really fat, whereas the ones in the middle grow tall, so that way you get your landscape like that. So it was designed. But the instructions were for 50 years. In 20 years you get rid of 1 in 4. In 50 years you get rid of these ones, and da-da-da-da-da. Now, he designed with a clear knowledge that those aristocratic families of England would still be farming, gardening. Someone would be there, and there would be gardeners there, and they would follow his instructions. So I came back to Australia a bit like that trip from Russia and thought, oh my God, we have such a short-term knowledge of things. We have got to actually do things with future in mind. And we are going to be here. My family is going to be farming in Indigo Valley in 100 years' time, just like my family were farming there 100 years ago. And the Aboriginal people in our communities are going to be with us for the long term. We are not going anywhere. The task for us is, where do we want to go? What are the values that are going to underpin our future? Because I am absolutely sure in 500 years, just like England, people will be living in this country. And if I've got my way, it will be the most magnificent part of the world to live in. Because we will be doing what Capability Brown did. We will have integrated our past and our history, which is our richest gift. We will be planning for the future, which is 200 and 300 years away. And we will have the values of respect, of working together, of documenting what we're doing, of bringing newcomers in, of succession planning, of moving through the system that you guys all know. But we will be doing it consciously and deliberately, not by default. So how do we do that? That's resilience, knowing that you're going to be here for a long time and not letting the naysayers get away with this planet's going to do something. It will only happen if we let it happen, and we've all got a conscious choice about that. And those of us in Landcare have got the skills and the knowledge and the networks to not let it happen. But we just got stuck on a little bypass, and we've let lack of government funding stop us. Well, I think lack of government funding is probably the greatest blessing we've actually had, because it liberates us to do our own work. So that's what I've learned about politics. If you're not there, you're not there. If your voice is not there, there's no one else going to speak for you. And when I got there, and raised my voice, people said, oh my God, gosh, she's speaking real sense. And not only that, my community, if I could say it, loved me. Well, not everybody, like half of them. But the majority, the noisy ones said, oh God, it's so good you're there, Cathy. Thank you. We're so pleased you're speaking up. We didn't have anyone speak up before, but now you're speaking up, which again was a surprise. So, what's our vision for Australia in the short term? Well, what's your vision? What's your family's vision? What's your community's vision? What's your local government's vision? What's your regional NLP vision? What's the state vision? What's the Commonwealth vision? Well, if you haven't put your two bobs in, it's not going to be there. So I totally agree with Minister Kelly, turn up to your political parties. But much more than that, turn up to your local government, turn up to your regional meetings, turn up to your state departments, but turn up to your Commonwealth ministers and get them talking. I wanted to go to this, I've got 2 more slides. This quote was found on the door of a toilet at Mittagundee Outdoor Education Centre in northeast Victoria. And I'm a patron of that organisation. And the thing, I'm going to read it to you, because I know you can read, but I'm going to read it. It says, the future is not some place we're going to, but one we are creating. And the paths to it are not found but made. The paths are not found, we make them. And the making of the pathways changes both the maker and the destination. So I am a totally different woman now because I've been on a political journey. And it changed me and it changed my community, let me say, for the better. And I never would have picked it if those young people hadn't said, Cathy, we want to be part of building the future and we want you to work with us on it. But if you haven't got a vision, it doesn't happen. And if you haven't got a voice, it doesn't happen. So I want to acknowledge again the Indigenous people here today and say thank you for yesterday, because it profoundly changed my sense of what we need to do at home. And I'm really, really grateful for that panel, and particularly for the video that we showed later on, the mothers and the grandmothers telling the stories to their kids. It changed me profoundly. So that's worth knowing. It actually comes from somebody else. It was used at Nelson Mandela's inauguration. But anyhow, the kids had picked it up. So that's that. So in summary, and bring it to an end before I open up for questions, find your voice and inspire others to use it, because the choice is really clear. If we don't do that, we're going to end up where we're headed.